يُبْدِينَ زِينَتَهُنَّ, that they would cover their zina. What is zina? What is the zina of a woman that she should cover, except for the categories that in this ayah are set out? Al-bu'ula, or al-aba, and so on and so forth. And at the same time, you have, for instance, a report from Ibn Abbas, wa Qatada, wa Ibn Makhrama that say, well, zina does not include nisf al-dhira', that half of the arm. It does not include nisf al-saq, that half the leg, that's not included in zina. You have, of course, many other reports that says zina includes everything except the face and hands. But at the same time, this coexists with in numerous early authorities that say that zina is ما جرت العادة والجبلة على ظهوره. What this means is whatever custom, what jibilla is nature, the nature of things, says is part of zina. So let me read to you Muhammad Asad's footnote, because I think it will help us save time. Yeah. So he says, my interpolation, this is footnote 37, my interpolation of the word decently reflects the interpretation of the phrase إِلَّا مَا ظَهَرَ مِنْهَا by several of the earliest Islamic scholars, and particularly by Al-Qifal, quoted by Razi, as that which a human being may openly show in accordance with prevailing custom, al-'ada al-jariyah. Although the traditional exponents of Islamic law have for centuries been inclined to restrict the definition of what may decently be apparent to a woman's face, hands, and feet, and sometimes even less than that, as I said, some of them said half the leg or half the arm, he continues, we may safely assume that the meaning of إِلَّا مَا ظَهَرَ مِنْهَا is much wider, and that the deliberate vagueness of this phrase is meant to allow for all the time-bound changes that are necessary for man's moral and social growth. The pivotal cause in the above injunction is the demand addressed in identical terms to men as well as to women to lower their gaze and be mindful of their chastity. And this determines the extent of what at any given time may legitimately, in consonance with Quranic principles of social morality, be considered decent or indecent in a person's outward appearance. I'll go on. Footnote 38 is probably also helpful. The noun khimar, of which khumur is the plural, denotes the head covering customarily used by Arabian women before and after the advent of Islam. According to most of the classical commentators, it was worn in pre-Islamic times more or less as an ornament and was let down loosely over the wearer's back. And since, in accordance with the fashion prevalent at the time, the upper part of a woman's tunic had a wide opening in the front, her breasts were left bare. Hence the injunction to cover the bosom by means of a khimar, a term so familiar to the contemporaries of the Prophet, does not necessarily relate to the use of a khimar as such, but is rather meant to make it clear that a woman's breasts are not included in the concept of what might be decently be apparent of her body, and should not therefore be displayed. So what Muhammad Asad is saying, and what I tend to agree with, is that word zina, what may appear of a woman, is very much like the concept of modesty, and we'll talk about tabarruj in a second. Like the concept of modesty, is bound by custom, practice, habit. The pivotal point is modesty. Is it mandatory that a woman covers her hair? In my opinion, and God knows best, note that the mention is bring the khimar to cover your chest. But there is no normative statement that you must indeed wear the khimar. That's, in my opinion, and Allahu A'lam. Does this mean all these women who wear the khimar, wear the hijab, should take it off? Absolutely not. Because if they sincerely believe that this is what Allah wants from them, then that's what absolutely they should do. And if they sincerely believe this is necessary for their modesty, this is absolutely what they should do. And moreover, there are parts of the world where if a woman is not wearing khimar, not covering her hair, it would be immodest. As there are parts of the world where if a woman is not covering her hair, it doesn't mean that she's immodest. But it's just to emphasize this point. Is Allah, by saying, bring your khimar upon your bosoms, is Allah saying you must in fact wear the khimar? In my opinion, that if Allah wanted to say you must in fact wear the khimar, Allah wouldn't have left it vague like this. Because the khimar was indeed worn like the turban, like the man's turban, as an ornament. Protection from the sun as an ornament. The khimar, as we know from, would often be hooked either at the front or in the middle of the head, or even in the high classes, the khimar would even be very hooked at the very back, like that, clipped here. So it was indeed an ornament. And the Quranic prescription is, okay, you see that piece of cloth? Cover your bosoms with it. There is a famous hadith attributed to Aisha that when this ayah was revealed, women would rip parts of their lower garments and cover their heads until they became like black crows. That hadith has a lot of problems as well. Many problems, but among the problems is that we know that already, unless you were a slave girl, or extremely poor, women wore a khimar. And so the tradition that says women ripped their garments to cover their heads would assume that they were going around without a khimar, which is historically not plausible. This is other than the isnad issues with that tradition. So we get to the crux of the matter is the interpretation of the earliest authorities, as I said, as some like Qatada and Ibn Makhrama and so on, and Ibn Abbas, who said that it's half the leg and half the arm. Most other authorities said it's the zina that must be covered as in the entire body except for the hands and the face. But this is again, in my opinion, and Allahu Alam, is that as I researched this, I found that it was all made pivotal, or the crux of the matter is majarat al-'ada alayh. Now, this takes us to the issue of zina itself. In my opinion, a woman could cover her hair and cover her entire body except for the hands and the face, and still violate the zina rule. The crux of the matter is what was referred to as tabarruj. It comes from the word baraja. Baraja is where a ship stands out in the sea for something to clearly appear. So tabarruj is to bring undue attention to the self. If you are bringing or if you are attracting undue attention even to the face, that is tabarruj. The nur that Surah An-Nur is talking about here is true modesty, substantive modesty. Yes, Allah sets the parameters that it will never be the case that showing cleavage is part of being modest. Why? Because Allah specifically said, cover the jayb. Don't show cleavage. So no woman can come and say, well, showing cleavage is part of modesty. And as we know, where elsewhere Allah says, lower your jilbab. So, we can get into juristic disagreements as to whether the feet, an inch above the feet, 2 inches above the feet, 3 inches above the feet, but substantively, Allah said, the modest thing to do is cover most of the leg. So, the chest and the leg. Now, other than that, it is custom, social standards, and substantive modesty. Surah An-Nur, to go back to Surah An-Nur is underscoring, again, because I know that, in my view, in Allahu Alam, in my view, that Allah was not telling you that the crux of modesty is to cover your hair or not cover your hair. That can be decided according to what counts as modest or immodest, depending on social circumstance and time and space and all of that. But what Allah was saying is pay attention to substantive modesty. Do not cheapen yourself. Do not commodify yourself. Do not teach yourself to violate your own privacy. If you get to the point where you say the purpose of my body is to put to commodify myself to people, you have violated your own honor.